Before I go into this video, I want to just talk about this buff that Albedo got on his skill. So previously, his Transient Blossom is only at 151% of his defense at level 8, and that was from the data mined sources. But now it seems to have been improved to 214% of his defense, so that's about a 40% increase in damage, and this is basically a huge buff for him. Moving on, I'm going to just talk about his builds and his weapon rankings and show you which is his best build and whatever gives you the highest DPS. So I managed to find out the calculation for how it scales with his defense, as in his skill, the Transient Blossom thingy. This is actually just one off from the number that was shown in game, so I can just easily assume that I have gotten the correct formula down, but it's actually quite easy since it's just his defense multiplied by the defense percentage, and then you multiply with any damage bonus if there is, and you can have this number easily. And then you factor in the resistance and the enemy's defense, and you'll get the same number. So after establishing that I have the correct formula, I will just go into the weapon rankings first, as sort of like a TLDR to make this video shorter. Over here in this sheet, you can see that I have this table here, and the best weapon right now will be the new sword, which is called the Summit Shaper, this one over here. And you can see that I have gotten the stats and everything from like the Memory of Dust, the equivalent of this sword. So if I were to check like Memory of Dust, it's basically the same as the sword. Anyway, the reason why the new sword is so good is because it has a 49.6% attack on its secondary stat. So this basically beats the Aquila and the Skyward Blade because of this huge amount of attack. And this effect that it has, it also adds an additional 20% to 40% if you have a shield, and it depends on whether you want to play him with a shield if you use the sword, but regardless it will still beat the Aquila Favonia because the Aquila only gives physical damage bonus, which is not what Albedo wants. Naturally, the second weapon that would be the best without considering energy recharge will be the Aquila Favonia. As for the third and fourth place, you have the Flute and the Black Cliff and the Black Sword, and they actually do pretty similar damage, so you know, originally I typed this down. I didn't know which to put on the third or the fourth, so actually you can just treat the Black Cliff and the Black Sword being similar to the Flute. The fifth would be the Skyward Blade, because if you don't need ER, then you know the stat is basically useless. 6 and 7 will be the Favonius Blade and the Sacrificial Sword respectively, and for craftable swords you can either craft the Prototype Rancor or the Iron Sting. So the thing is that the Prototype has a higher base attack, but the Iron Sting has a much better effect. Both does similar damage, so you can just craft whatever you want. If you consider in energy recharge into your weapons, then the weapon rankings will be as follows. So first you have the new sword, which is the what is it called, Summit Shaper, and then the second would be the Skyward Blade or the Aquila Favonia. Energy recharge is kind of dependent on the player himself. Like it depends on you to get like how much energy recharge to have like a comfortable amount. And you have the Flute and the Favonius Blade being similar in the third place. And for the fourth place, you have the Sacrificial Sword or the Black Cliff or the Black Sword. So these are all similar damage. Even if the Flute shows that it does more damage than the Black Cliff or the Black Sword, it's only by a very small margin, and I just want to clarify that the third and fourth place are very, very similar, maybe except for the Favonius Blade and the Sacrificial Sword. The reason why the Flute probably showed more DPS is because Albedo needs attack, right? And you need like a base, you need a substantial amount of attack first before factoring in crit rate or crit damage. So that's the reason why the Flute is technically better than the Black Cliff or the Black Sword, but the Black Cliff and the Black Sword actually does benefit from the Transient Blossom because you have crit rate and crit damage. And since the Transient Blossom doesn't scale with attack, it scales with your defense, right? That means that crit will essentially just boost the damage of your Transient Blossoms. So it's up to you whether you want the Flute or the Black Cliff or the Black Sword. It's you know, dependent on your playstyle, I guess. And then lastly, you have the craftable weapons, which is the Prototype Rancor or the Iron Sting. Both are the same in a sense if you consider in energy recharge, because these two craftable weapons, they don't give energy recharge. Alright, so for the best artifact sets for him, it would be definitely either the Archaic Petra 4-piece or the Noblest Oblige 4-piece. So again, Archaic Petra, you don't use it unless you really know what you're doing, like because you have to pick up the specific crystallized reaction orbs or crystals or whatever to get this damage bonus, and this is not very easily done if you're fighting against enemies with innate elements such as slimes, and even wobble flowers are resistant to the element that they are infused with. If you know what you're doing and you can play around it very well, then I would probably go for the Archaic Petra 4-piece. But if you don't want to bother with this condition, then maybe you can just go for the Noblest Obliged 4-piece. It gives you the best damage for your team. It'll basically be, very good for every situation. And you can also mix up the Archaic Petra 2-piece and the Noblest Obliged 2-piece, but it doesn't really improve your team's DPS, which is something that a support should be doing. Alright, so now I want to talk about going for attack percent versus defense percent on his Sense artifact. So over here, this column is actually based on more attack, while the second and the fourth column are basically just focused on more defense. So you can see here that the first and third has lower defense but higher attack, and the second and fourth has more defense but lower attack. It has concluded that going for defense on your Sense artifact is actually better by almost 10%, I guess, about 7 to 8% more damage. This is inclusive of like casting his elemental burst, his skill, and proccing the transient blossom. This will also mean that you'll want defense on your substats on any artifact, because this is to boost the transient blossom's damage. And again, I don't know why they make it scale under defense, but since that's the way it goes, then I'm going to do this comparison, and the conclusion is that defense on your Sense artifact is better than attack percent. But you should still get your geo damage bonus on your goblet, and either crit rate or crit damage on your circlet. If you go for all defense on every single artifact, like your Sense, your goblet, and your circlet, it will be much worse than going for geo damage bonus and crit rate or crit damage. And for the last part of this video, I'll just talk about how I calculate their DPS, which is basically the damage per second for each of these of his skill or of his burst. So the DPS of his Transient Blossom is something that people are probably more concerned about, because you have a permanent uptime and you can actually just do a lot of damage based on his defense. But the thing is that his Elemental Burst scales from his attack, which is kind of like contradicting in a sense, because why would they make it only scale with defense? They should probably just make it scale with defense as a damage bonus, and then make it scale with attack originally. So regardless, that's just how it goes for now. And basically the DPS of the Transient Blossom is just divided by 2, because the cooldown is 2 seconds, or rather the interval of proccing each Transient Blossom is 2 seconds. As for the DPS of his Elemental Burst, I basically divide it by 15. I take this Elemental Burst damage and I divide it by 15 because it has a 2 seconds cast time and it also has a 12 seconds cooldown. So when you combine that, it's 14 seconds. But realistically, you need to add 1 or 2 seconds if you include character swapping time or your reaction time. You might not even get enough energy to like cast it on cooldown. So realistically, it could be like 16 to 18 seconds even. But this is like a theoretical situation, so it's not too far off and it's still quite realistic. So that's it for this video, and thanks for watching till the end. So if you find yourself watching these kind of videos, maybe just hit like and subscribe and all that. So thanks for your support.